The Advanced Edition changed Into the Breach much more than FTL free DLC with the same name. It's not more of the same, I've seen sequels with much fewer ideas. The only downside is that all of this can be very confusing. So while the game recommends this for anyone who has a good grasp of the core game, I'm going to explain it in much more detail. We'll take a quick look at all the squads, including the fastest track to see all that the game has to offer. How the game works is that every squad will focus on a particular mechanic. If you take your time to complete the squad achievement, you have a pretty good grasp of what the squad has to offer. Plus there are extra challenges, and of course there is the hardest difficulty, which is called unfair for a reason, and that will be the focus on this tier list, even though the tips to play with each squad will work anywhere. But of course the goal is always that perfect 40k run, which is the maximum score you can get in the game, and it happens when no building gets damaged. While perfect means doing all the objectives, so 4 perfect islands, that will get you a reward that will make the following islands easier. So on a perfect 40k run, the biggest challenge is the first island, and the first island is more unfair than the rest for different reasons. First, playing well grants you a snowball effect, while the game is more balanced around taking a couple of damage at the beginning and then trying to recover, which will make the campaign more interesting. That's a given. For strategy games, the hardest difficulty will take out the fun. The other reason is much simpler. Time travelers. These are pilots that can change how we play the game, and they can start fully upgraded from a different timeline. I've talked about them in great detail in the pilot tier list that includes a lot of lore, and that is so important that consider that with each squad there is a small icon with the best pilot that will affect their position on the list. We see that case by case though. But let's take a step back. What should you do at the start of the game? If you have time, you can of course play on normal and hard, completely ignore the Advanced Edition stuff, and you can easily get more than 100 hours of Into the Breach. I played 5 times that just to try to understand every little detail, but I can tell you that equipment and pilot abilities don't make the game harder. Quite the opposite if you are lucky. The new weapons are much stronger, but of course there's a larger pool, so you might get unlucky. So what I recommend at any difficulty is try to get perfect islands, avoiding the hardest missions, those that gave you problems in the past, or the high threat missions if you can. Then when you unlock some good pilots, you can turn on new missions, and when you unlock the Advanced Edition squads, you can turn on the enemy units, because the new VEC are balanced around the new weapons of course. So I wouldn't recommend jumping straight to them. I'm sure that people have refunded the game because they unlocked the wrong squad. But the best way is laid out for us. The Rusting Hux is the first unlock and the easiest squad to play with, because it's based around smoke, while the Zenith Guard is the weakest squad and might add to the confusion, while the Rusting Hux are the best bet to win your first campaign if you're having problems with the Riftwalkers. After that I would say Blitzkrieg for new players, Hazardous Mechs if this is your second playthrough after the base game, very strong but also hard to play, while the Frozen Titans are a treat but it's not a well balanced squad. So if you want to go fast, I recommend actually the Mist Eaters after the Rusting Hux. Both squads use smoke, which is the easiest mechanic because it blocks any VEC attack, while for experienced players the most fun squads are Bomber Mechs, Hazardous Mechs, and maybe still Judoka, though they don't adapt well to Unfair and the Advanced Edition content unfortunately. Also no spoilers for the Secret Squad because I've still yet to do a perfect 40k run with them, hard to play with, so I wouldn't recommend saving the 25, but when I manage to do it, they will have their own special video. After the Advanced Edition update there was an outline here and it ruined the surprise. Also lowered the requirements, now you don't need to do all achievements anymore, you have 5 coins to spare. But before it was the 100% completion reward, and the most interesting I've ever seen of any game. Achievements are very well integrated in the game, they're not a waste of time, they give you direction on how to play with each squad. So the whole game is a huge learning curve, but with these squads you'll get to the top very fast, if you can survive, I guess. Because they are great for starting out, but for unfair they should be a challenge reserved for later, I guess. It's an interesting challenge to go back and see how the game changed. That's what I did. I was very surprised with the result. I'll link the playlist below if you're interested. In this video I'll be very brief. But if you're having trouble winning with one squad, it might be the wrong squad. Either for your playstyle or because it's very weak. And the weaker the squad, the more luck is needed to win. If you play perfectly, you should get a win every single time with most squads, but you will take damage, especially on unfair. There's one more VEC for every difficulty at the start of the mission, but the game caps at 6 and 7 on the volcano, because 3 mechs don't have the tools to deal with all of those. Of course, you can always try random or custom. Now we don't have many options, so 3 of the strongest mech might work, but I much prefer play with the given squads because their synergies are already in place. But you can find many new combinations on random, especially Chaos Roll. There's no class restriction, so you can get 3 of the same mech. Of course, you can also do a custom squad with 3 very strong mechs or very weak mechs. And this was the easy way to get 2 objectives in one. Now there are more options, of course, but if you're having trouble with a squad, a weapon, it might be worth to step back and to go to a simpler squad first. Or grind a specific pilot, as I explained in the last video, and I'll tell you more soon. So here we go. First thing, establish a baseline. We have the tutorial mech that will take all the glory, then his little brother, and then the one that will actually carry the team. So the prime class is made for the front line, and that's where most of the action goes on an 8x8 board. If you are too far back, you're doing something wrong, or you're playing an overpowered ranged mech that can push 4 tiles in a row. Well, the brute will get stuck somewhere. The -1 HP is nowhere near enough to balance this power, but it's fine like this, because if everyone was like a brute, we would never be able to finish a run. So this is the template for all the squads, but there's a 4th class called Science, where anything goes that can replace one of these. So the squads where the Science replace the brute will be the strongest. The squads where the Science replace the ranged might be the weakest. This is a well-balanced squad, but unfortunately the brute class is not balanced at all, especially for unfair, though some brutes are pretty good. With dash and +2 damage, the combat mech will do 4 damage from distance, while the cannon mech needs 5 core to do 3 damage. These are the 3 types of attack original in the game: melee, projectile and artillery. Artillery can go above anything, while this gets blocked by buildings or mountains, or any unit for that matter. So this is the mech that needs more help. This is where the pilot, fully upgraded pilot, should go, and there are a few options. My favorite are Prospero Eric 1, because there's no risk of getting stuck, and again we're talking about unfair, so 5 or 6 back on the field. But more recently I found out about Ghana that allow you to start from the back and attract enemy attacks, which means they won't attack the buildings. And if you're lucky, we get the first turn very easy, but normally it's enough to be behind VEC, so you'll be able to push them from the back. Low damage single target won't be able to help much on unfair, but the pushing is great, and that's the strength of the Riftwalkers. A great squad to learn how important pushing is. If you can delay the VEC for 4 turns, you have won, so that's why I used Harold a lot on squads that don't have all these pushing capabilities, but we'll get to that. Skilled condenses 2 old skills, +1 move and +2 HP, so the brute now can actually tank and move more. So all the 3 original good skills are condensed in one pilot now, but if you get unlucky, the advanced edition skills might be less lucky. There is a skill tier list on the pilot tier list video. This is the best option that we have. and it will help a lot. And this will make a huge difference compared to Ralph, an upgraded Ralph at the beginning. So if you are looking for a perfect 40k run, you have to reset or modify the game file to get the best pilot with the best skills, or just hope that you get lucky. That's the alternative. I've tried more challenging runs, like no secondary weapons, but the more the restrictions, the more luck gets involved. Of course, the reactor is needed for the ability, that's why Hurricane could be a good option, especially if it's not upgraded. For example, here we are ready to take down the dam, but we haven't been lucky with the Fireflies, but the ranged mech is so powerful. Without this building, this would have been a better move, but the artillery cannot shoot close. But despite that, Ghana can still, the skilled ability allows you to tank this and save the buildings behind. This is where it shines, even though here probably it's better to do this and can pull. Of course, Ghana works just as well with the Prime Mech, but you can decide case by case, looking at the map, who's the better fit. This will work out. And that's Ghana working at its best. And a rare case of empty ties. Technically they are chasm ties, but in Archive they don't usually appear, so this is just make it prettier, I guess. No impact on gameplay over here. As for upgrades, the artillery mech has only one weakness, and funny enough, it's the fact that it deals 1 damage. It's so powerful at pushing that often you want to hit a building to push a mech away, but you need to upgrade for that. So first upgrade needs to be buildings immune, no question about that. All the other upgrades are just extra damage and this dash, which has the same issue as the brute, that with all the mech close together we don't have an empty so much room that the dash is helpful. Okay, now Ghana worked too well and we cannot get out of this situation like this because of the webbing. So just avoid any more wear and tear on the timeline. I believe I have to do this instead, but that's the power of the range mech reaching that mech that no one else can reach from this side, and then uses the pilot, even though it's not going to work being on fire, no. The next turn I will have time to repair, only 2 mech. And you would have lost a mech without the skilled pilot. We can also step on water, but there's no reason to do that. Also, even though you're on fire, you get the time pod. But now it's convenient, the 1 damage in this situation, so sometimes it's helpful. Anyway, first score, as I was saying, buildings immune for a perfect 40k run. If you don't mind taking 1 damage, then the best move is to get 1 move on the mech that doesn't have the skill, the pilot, and then get the damage after that. Either here or here. This is a boss killer, very helpful at the end. Otherwise the upgrades are not so great, and that's why I put them in B tier. So we get the reference point, and on the Riftwalkers I definitely want strong secondary weapons. Any good weapon will do, but I especially like the any class weapons that give more flexibility, whether it's an airstrike or a smoke drop to get out of an emergency, or the boosters, anything that gives you extra mobility, the Hazardous Max weapon for the Prime, so being able to hit anywhere on the map or jump around, I guess. Now this is a horrible mission, even worse with the Rusting Hulks, but with Ghana we can save the objective and maybe complete it, only thanks to this situation. This is a very peculiar squad that works better on RST because of the sun tile, but RST has the hardest missions. So if you hit this one, we get the smoke and it will work like this. And we get the passive that smoke deals damage to enemy units every turn. But that's not the interesting part. First, the ranged class is nerfed, only 1 tile but 2 damage, so becomes a bit of a prime or brute with extra damage. And if these two were in a line, you could have survived. Over here you can do this, over here you could have done this, and this is the only way that can take care of 2 targets at the same time, so more like a prime mech for the high damage and 1 target, but the brute is the only brute that flies and is completely different from anything else, so I'm not sure why they call brute, but this brute can jump and, well, extra damage, smoke that will deal damage next turn is very helpful and all, but the key part is that it will stop the attack. So with a regular range we could have brought this one back to block and take care of 2 at the same time. This one is a bit less powerful and it won't allow us to get out of the situation, but that was a gamble. That's why I don't do RST as a first island usually. Even if they're weak Vec, it's never worth it because of the tough objectives and the bad maps. As usual, it's the first turn, because everything else then we can defend. Although the Fireflies are the weakest enemy, so we've been lucky anyway. Also a lot of luck with Ghana lately. It was a 50-50 if the Vec attacked this way or this way, but this Firefly didn't have anything to target, so Ghana was the only option. The downside of the smoke is that we cannot attack from it, unless we have Camilla. Camilla seems the obvious choice both on the jet mech and the pulse mech, probably more important on the jet mech, but there are more options that could be helpful. For example, the first upgrade should be +1 range on the aerial bombs. That's why I like the pacifist version of this that just adds smoke, and 1 extra tile is extremely helpful, can get up to 3, but the only way to get the +1 range from the start is with a secret pilot, and I would definitely recommend it. Well, I guess I'm going to say Mafan. I'm not going to show it for a while in case you want to avoid spoilers, you can wait till the Frozen Titans. +1 range, definitely a priority. Mafan, great fit also for his other characteristic, a great fit for this mech, which is going to help much more than Camilla. The range, as usual, doesn't benefit greatly, especially not from Silica because it needs to move. So I need to play with the ranged mech quite close to the Vec to benefit from the second target on unfair, otherwise there won't be enough attacks to take care of that. That's why I want +1 range. The Vec close to each other can be jumped over, and that's a critical part. So if you get a time pod early with any pilot you can get the extra range, otherwise yeah. So I wouldn't recommend Ghana, of course, in that situation, or maybe try Ghana and then use the extra core for the extra range for a while until you get to the end of the first island. But the pulse mech is not great because it cannot fly, so it's an aspiring ranged mech that doesn't have the mobility. So just like the brute, so this is more like a prime, this is more like a science, I guess. Hybrid, well, this is a unique mech, and this is more like a brute. So it doesn't have the mobility. Actually, yes, it has, unlike the brute, it has +1 mobility, but cannot go through Vec. So Eric 1 over here could be helpful with the shield self, but just like Harold is great on a flying mech, Prospero would be great with the repulse mech. The only downside of starting with a pilot on the pulse mech is that his upgrades are not as helpful. So he could shield himself, but if you start with a skilled pilot, of course Opener wouldn't do anything. The other good ability beside these two is Opener, to get out of the first turn, which is the hardest on unfair and hard. So many strong options, but if I had to choose I would do with Mafan on the jet mech, second option Prospero on the pulse mech, and hope to get Camilla on the way for the other mech. That would help a lot. And that's the main reason to go for a perfect island, even though if you are not doing a perfect 40k run, the free pilot can change the squad for the better. While the other upgrades are just +1 damage, as we saw with the Riftwalkers, is important but not a priority to give up on other stuff, because we need to reach the Vec first. This one has 4 movement but limited HP, so it might get in trouble. Cannot use him for blocking unless you have Mafan. and then I would go for the +1 damage when you get the range. So for single targets, +1 damage is not very exciting, but for multiple targets become helpful, and this is even more targets, but requires 3 core. The good thing is that you can move the passive where you want, so you have a good chance of finding a better ranged weapon. Then you can move the storm generator over here and collect the cores, so you can, depending on the mission, you can move the cores to damage on the storm generator or the aerial bombs and extra movement or HP. But if it's just a single target, the +1 damage is not a priority at all. I wish they swapped the order, because many people will do +1 damage thinking that's the first one. Instead, it's a very big mistake. The key point is that the VEC are not going to attack because they are under smoke. The smoke will allow you to delay indefinitely, and that's why they are so good. So the more we go on, the stronger the smoke all around the map. At some point the VEC might just not attack because they don't have any option. If you find a secondary weapon with smoke, that's extremely overpowered, and a pushing weapon for the jetmech can be helpful. Of course, range weapon, priority. Secondary range weapon better than this is a priority. In many situations you want to push 2 VEC at a time. Science mech, case by case. There is enough shielding, so these upgrades are much better than Riftwalkers. Shield friendly can be helpful in different missions that you can need to protect a friendly unit. So overall, even if you're not lucky with the secondaries, this is a solid squad. So is this S tier? Without pilots, definitely no, but with Mafan or Prospero, probably yes. In the base game, Rusting Hulks are great, don't need too much help, but of course on Unfair, I need to compare with the other S tier later. Next is the Zenith Guard, just don't try this at home. It's a very annoying challenge. But I recommend instead that Blitzkrieg, a rather unique squad that works very well together with a prime carrying instead of the ranged. Unless you find secondary weapons for the range, the usual very good chance of finding good weapons for your ranged mech. Still, it's not a bad mech. 2 damage and pushing 2 tiles laterally is good enough, while the other 2 do their thing, and their thing is the electric whip, while the grappling hook can just help a bit, but again, this is more of a science class. Of course you can equip any weapon you want, but the 1 power core is very expensive at the beginning. The electric whip is one of the weapons that needs 1 power core, which there were many more before the Advanced Edition update. It's all about the electric whip, so this is an absolute priority. Could have made the chain longer thanks to the boulder, that's the main use of the boulder, but it's already pretty good if you have the building chain. Things like this might be someone's favorite moment, but you can see the problem when you get the objectives in the way, and that's why I like to do archive first, because the more you wait, the more chances of having these very tricky 2-star objectives, high threat missions. So the Detritus is easier, but as a 3rd island, the Detritus has the easiest objectives. So as a 3rd island, you have more chances of finding missions like this, and the Blitzkrieg have many missions that they simply cannot do. Train, archive tanks. In short, they are bad at protecting and good at destroying, unless it's destroy a mountain, because lighting does not work. So for example, here we could solve the situation, but when it comes to the lighting mech, is in trouble, so we need to do this, and then yeah, I cannot attack much, so it still works, but it was a close one. And Kai Miller by itself was not enough. I tried 5 times with Kai Miller, and they always took 1 or 2 damage on the first island. Instead, I didn't have too much trouble completing the first island with Prospero, and then, funny enough, I got Kai Miller. But the game changer was this, just a simple punch from a distance to damage like the punch mech, but you can change direction, that's the Advanced Edition weapons, that helped us a lot. This is the rebounding volley, You can choose any two tiles to push back and forth. Those change everything. The hard part was already over when I got the smoke drops and Mafan, though they helped a lot with some tricky objectives on Pinnacle. Overall, Kai is very powerful, but on a very strong mech and not in the first island because she cannot benefit from the best skills. Of course, +1 mech reactor is fine, but open air is pointless because she already has the boost, and the skilled is a bit pointless because she doesn't want to take damage, so you cannot use her extra HP, and that's the biggest issue that I found in the attempts with her. Of course, if the lightning mech takes the damage, then Kai is useless for the rest of the mission. The big difference was Prospero not only flying, but having extra HP, so he could just be in front of the buildings and save things. And then, of course, with the extra weapon, this brute became quite good. That's also the reason I wasn't too fond of the upgrades, because it's better to replace the weapons. Also very limited capabilities, upgrade capabilities. This is also very strong. This high damage, 3 or 5 to one target and pushing everything around that target. Very helpful later on. And one thing I have to say, the lightning chain is great on the volcano because there are so many VEC that one of the rare times I didn't get any damage without the ice generator. Just lightning chain for damage with Kai to everyone. Also, this Kai had popular hero and thick skin, which is completely not in character, but also quite funny because the best skills are a bit nerfed with Kai, and then I got the worst skills. But still, 1 extra damage makes all the difference between 3 and 4 with all the Alpha VEC. Although to get 3 base, you need 3 power cores, so it's a long journey. So the Blitzkrieg are a great squad for a casual run and to look cool, but are they S tier? I'd say no for now. That brute is just too weak. Even with Prospero, was barely enough to get the first perfect island. And since we are here, I did try again with Prospero on the Zenith Guard, and it worked out because of this little thing. The ice generator is the strongest weapon in the game, and fully upgraded on a flying mech just freezes everything turn 1. Don't need to worry about the mission anymore. Just block or let them emerge 1 at a time, 2 at a time, so very easy to deal with. The punchy was not helpful at all. Instead, here I had the first thing that helped me through the first and second island, actually. I didn't have the punch, but I found immediately the hazardous mech passive. So this is as self-damage, and we got +1 healing from that. So with the first core, I used +1 damage each and that weapon. So we could do 2 self-damage, heal 1, so deal 3 damage or 4 with the bump. This became quite good, unlike the Blitzkrieg one. So Prospero definitely the best choice over here. Usually Ghana, also Mafan could work at the same time, but I haven't tested Ghana. Ghana's usefulness depends on the map, so on open maps Prospero is better, but on small maps with low movement VEC, then Ghana just wins the mission instantly. And that's why sometimes Prospero could be better than Ghana, but overall, again, depends on the squad. So in this situation, definitely Prospero, +1 damage each, and hope for the best. But yeah, the ice generator was not enough at all. This shield is too small, this is just too weak without upgrades, and yeah, there are no useful upgrades aside from this, which is risky, but Abe is a bit like Camila for the rusting hooks. It seems that's perfect for this situation because it takes 0 damage, then you can do +1 damage each and deal 3 damage with 1 self-damage and 5 HP if it's skilled, but in the end Prospero was just too helpful. And as I said, the ice generator at the beginning wasn't enough. I had to change my strategy again. So I did the opposite of Prospero. I went from Archive to Detritus, which is the easiest. So basically my strategy with this squad, do the easiest islands first, Detritus first, Archive second, Pinnacle and RST, and hope that you get a good enough weapon to survive. Of course, I got the ice generator, so yeah. Wait until you get the ice generator is the only tactics we have with the worst. I think I can say that the Zenith Guard are the worst squad for a perfect 40k run, although I haven't tried the secret squad on Unfair yet. In the end, I needed the rebounding artillery that I found again here. Also, Rosie could help to remove, doesn't remove fire, but can free someone else from the ice. That was helpful, but I got plenty of pilots. Harold with pushing over here and the rebounding volley with one extra power core because it's arranged. So yeah, this squad, as I mentioned before, this squad doesn't have any ranged and is the weakest one, exactly like the Heat Sinkers. Need to wait for that. Right now we briefly go through the next 4 squads that I already covered in great detail, and as I used expressive titles last year, you can already see, without watching the video, you can already tell what happened. Steel Judoka were my favorite squad on hard, but Unfair taught me how to play the game perfectly, you might say. And yeah, they're not as good as I thought. A very cool combination, like for someone else, could be the Blitzkrieg, but there's just not enough room to maneuver, to do the fancy maneuvers. Also, we need to find the best spot. Actually, that's the same for the Blitzkrieg. So the coolest squads actually need a very specific combination. Instead, here in this tier list, I'm evaluating the best to use on a generic perfect 40k run. Anyway, you could say that the Steel Judoka are the inverted Riftwalkers, while the Flame Behemoths are just the Riftwalkers plus fire, while the Hazardous Mechs are a mix of the Steel Judoka and the Riftwalkers, so you could say Riftwalkers version 3, while the Frozen Titans are a bit harder to pinpoint because the ranged mech had an identity crisis. You could say they look too much in the mirror, so these are reflections of the Vec attack, of the Brute attack, and yeah, this one had an identity crisis, looking too much into the looking glass. But let's go in order. The Judo mech is very good with projectiles because he can step in front, especially with the skilled pilot over here. Ghana is the best choice. So you can keep Fireflies at bay, but you might need to restart to abandon the timeline if there are too many artillery Vec. He cannot even attack if the tile behind is occupied, and I did this with Harold, but Ghana is probably the strongest one. Of course, Kai could help because of the Buildings immune. I learned quickly that Buildings immune is crucial, so having Kai Miller with the extra core on Buildings immune from the start would be great. Otherwise, first reactor core, first time pod needs to go here. In this situation, Kai might be as strong as Ghana because the Judo mech cannot do much. The Gravity mech can push from afar, but no upgrade path. And yeah, of course, Ally immune is not very helpful, only with some objectives, but +2 damage is way too expensive, so +1 damage here should be the second objective, but again, first priority, get another prime weapon, because this is good as a secondary, but it's just too limiting in general. So the only hope, having 5 HP, 5 movement and armored, and projectile Vec or gastropod, you can stay in front. And as I mentioned many times, with the Moth, doesn't matter the squad, but the Moth and the first islands are just too strong, so I would just reload if they are Moth on Archive, or you can start on Detritus. But then Archive will get harder and harder the more you wait, unless you wait on the 4th island, but Yeah, 4th island is always the easiest unless there are tumblebugs, because tumblebugs can destroy everything. That's the only time that I was in trouble on the 4th island, because they can be leader, so 2 explosive boulders are just too much. But if there are no tumblebugs, leave the hardest island as 4th, fully upgraded, best weapons, and you're good. My original run, I wasn't playing too good. I started with Harold, but in the end I replaced Win just for the volcano with Archie, because I like Archie, but wasn't the best choice, just to go full Android. But started with Harold, would have been better with Ghana, and I barely squeaked by. And of course I didn't pick the best. Of course this is the passive. This is the spear that has a multi-target attack, so it's not a bad choice. Can attack up to 3 ties and push the last one. So usually I don't use tanks, but especially not during the run, the normal islands, maybe on the volcano. But yeah, Silica of course helps. You can attack and throw the thing. But yeah, this is a very good weapon, so build the whole squad around this. So Silica just needed the base weapon, can push in any direction for 2 times, and you can use the steel judoka, well, not in this situation, but the normal judo mech move. So some cool combinations in which you don't move Silica, but you push it, you attack it with one of the 2 other mechs. So you can attack 2 ties, and yeah, that's what I meant when Silica becomes the center of the squad. And of course in this situation I got the teleporter with the flying, so this became exactly like the flame behemoth, and I didn't have any issue at all. So I had very strong primaries and could afford not to have the best secondaries. Of course this is the passive, that's the downside of the passive. As for where I put them, I'm not sure yet. They're definitely appealing to me, but the range mech alone will put them one above the rift workers, but the other 2 are dragging the squad down. Although this science mech might be stronger than a brute if you play it correctly. You need to play in a corner because it needs to go horizontally or vertically depending on the situation, since it can only pull, but pulling is much more helpful than you think. Let's leave it them here for now. Although if you count the passive and also the pilot, because Harold is completely useless over here, but could make this one, well, Kazakh Pleth could make this one push. So considering the pilot choice, as I mentioned, this tier list is the best, the starting pilot included, and I would put them here for now. While with the flame behemoths, I finally learned about Ghana and got through the first island by just avoiding webs and moths, so avoiding the hardest peck, but then I got lucky with the ice generator, so the rest of the run was just a joke. I used the flood. This weapon transforms water or lava. I wanted to test it on the volcano, the lava, making lava pools, but yeah, just for fun. That's not an advanced edition weapon, but it's not very helpful. And my favorite range weapon now, the rebounding volley, always take it. While I use the control on the flame behemoths, so yeah, identity crisis of the flame behemoths, just used ice and mind control. It's a science weapon, of course. And the Hurricane, of course, helps a lot, getting stuck over here. And also for the ice generator, so, well, I mentioned flying, but usually I would put it, the ice generator, I would put it here, but with Hurricane, doesn't matter too much. We can go through. And I like to use Ariadne only on the flame behemoths. I wonder if there is a higher chance of getting her, because I always get there on the flame behemoth and remove the passive. Well, in this case I don't have fire at all, but before the advanced edition this was worth 1 power core, so I would just remove the flame shielding and use it for extra movement, because HP wasn't as important with the old Vec, and play like that, and then maybe find Ariadne for the swap mech, so is the only one that's danger of getting burned. So 1 low HP and always in the middle of the fire. So Ariadne over here, very helpful, but is the only situation in which she is helpful. Otherwise, it's a very weak squad. +1 range is mandatory, but in both of them, so this is the strongest. So first core I would put it here, but if you start with Ghana with an upgraded pilot, not Ghana, but you can do +1 range immediately, and Eric 1 here instead can add +1 range on the flamethrower. But yeah, it's a weak squad, and I always drop the fire because yes, this is 1 damage exactly like the Artemis artillery, the first range weapon. That's quite good, but the Riftwalkers. But the problem is that, well, first the Vec on fire are in the way, so we cannot move around. That was a big issue. That is a big issue on Unfair. And also, it doesn't scale well because fire is always 1 fire. So instead of flame shielding, also in addition to flame shielding, I would have liked to do fire deals 1 extra damage with if you spend 2 or 3 power cores. That would make all the difference, because in the end it's just, yeah, it's +2 damage down there, but it's the fire that's weakest. 1 damage on Island 3 and 4 is just not enough. You need other weapons, so there's no point in getting the +2 damage over here. Backburn could be helpful, especially with spiders and blobbers and all of that, but yeah, priority is the range, the swamp mech, and hope that the teleport just leads the team to victory, I guess. And again, first new weapon should be a prime weapon, although need to get lucky for that, while the flame shielding, no cores, so you can put it anywhere, doesn't matter. These two are fine for a while, then you need another ranged weapon, strongest, more damage ranged weapon. But the teleporter is great, so put the flame shielding over here and we are good. Especially on the volcano, the swap mech is great because the volcano will target your mechs and you can just swap with something else. For a perfect 40k run, definitely need the extra range. Depending on the map, you can give up Ghana's ability and just use the +1 range. That's what I did. But beyond that, it's not worth it to upgrade too much, because on the 3rd island you would have replaced them for something stronger. So upgrade that, not waste 3 power core for +2 damage, unless you really can't find anything. Very unlucky, but yeah, teleporter definitely the one to upgrade, also cheaper than the others. So any core equals 1 more tile. Very strong until the end. So Henrik 1 could be actually a good choice, but I started with Ghana, got into an accident, unfortunately, even with the ice generator. Yeah, I wasn't playing too well, but got a bit too confident. Henrik 1 with +1 range on the flamethrower could be a good start, but yeah, not enough for turn 1, so fire is just too weak on Unfair. It's best to hope that the Vec target Ghana instead, and basically reset when you find the moths, scorpions, leapers. Although leapers are vulnerable if they're not alpha, they're just 1 HP, so they will die from fire. They can still push it, so these two can push, this one can do more than push. It's not bad. Of course, compared to the control shot and the exchange mech, this is nothing, but surprisingly good on a perfect 40k run. I thought the judo mech would have been much stronger, but it wasn't the case. I need to decide how to weigh the first island, because that's the most important part of a perfect 40k run, and they're quite good at it, but the rest, you cannot get the ice generator every run, of course. If you don't get good weapons, advanced edition weapons, the run will probably end on Island 3 on a forced high threat mission. There's nothing you can do. Also, they don't benefit from a pilot as much as, say, the Frozen Titans. So, I guess very deep mechanical spoilers for the Frozen Titans if you don't want to know. Skip the rest of this section. The big spoiler is for my fun, but of course, did you know that you can freeze the train So the train mission becomes something to avoid at all costs with the Blitzkrieg to something to look out for with the Frozen Titans. Apparently the train is not in a hurry, so it doesn't need to reach the end of the map. It can stay frozen in the same place forever because it doesn't move. So for example, the satellites will not launch, so you won't get the objective done if they're frozen, even if you defrost them when they're supposed to launch because they miss their attack, in quotation, as if it was a VEC. So if the last satellite on the second to last turn doesn't prime because it's frozen, then even if you break the ice it won't leave on the last turn. As for the Frozen Titans, we get an interesting weapon that does nothing when the VEC attack is symmetrical, but otherwise it's quite helpful when the VEC has a lot of HP. Shield could be helpful, +1 damage, not too much, but not really enough of a priority to replace Prospero with Herrick 1, so Prospero here would be good, but of course it's even better on the mirror mech that actually needs, so in this situation Herrick 1 +1 damage could be helpful to do. Of course the power core is on Prospero, and this is very strong, but if you don't get the time pod early, this might not be enough. Also, the problem with the mirror mech is that you may damage buildings, so perfect vertical run is not the greatest, but Cryo Launcher, of course, is the focus of this squad, and the weird ranged flying here, which made more sense as a science class. Just one more overpowered weapon for the ranged pool. Mafan changes how you play the ice mech. Of course, Bethany would work too, but then if you break the ice, it will go back to the usual. While Mafan, yes, you don't have upgrades, so basically the +1 reactor core of Mafan can go only on the movement, but the fact that you can use the range mech every time, so this becomes trivial. This is the challenge the Frozen Titans use the other two, usually the mirror mech, to free the ice mech from the ice. That's very rewarding, but if you use Mafan, the squad breaks. Ice is great, blocks the VEC. The only downside is that single target, so being single target means that there are 4 or 5 VEC on turn 1 that needs to be dealt with, but after turn 1, of course, they have a chance of targeting a frozen VEC just as much as a building. So yeah, ice in general is overpowered, but it's the mirror mech as usual, the brute that needs a buff. So while to make the squad very easy to play with, it's not as rewarding, and that's not the best way to get the perfect first island. That's with Prospero, Herrick 1. Because the main weapons are not that great, unless you have Ghana or Prospero on the brute, of course. I got both. I think on the first time pod I found Ghana, so the rest of the run wasn't too bad, even though I didn't get other strong weapons. Of course, Gemini Missiles competes with the ice, so it's a very strong, but not on the right mech. This goes through buildings, just a push that goes phases through buildings, so that's helpful when you cannot shoot the Janus cannon, and this I wouldn't do it again. But another situation in which the pilots carried more than the weapons, and that's why I went into great detail on the pilot tier list. The Frozen Titans can benefit from a pilot massively, and that's why I keep repeating that this includes a starting pilot with fully upgraded with the best skills. Mafan can break the squad, but even Prospero and the Brute with the +1 damage is great after first time pod, since Mafan doesn't have upgrades over here. So Mafan is definitely easier, but the other is more rewarding, and overall both of them are a good option and make the Frozen Titan an S tier just because of the ice. And finally, my favorite combination, Silica with the hydraulic legs, can just jump around. But of course there's the self-damage, so you need skilled, and Viscera Nanobots heal the damage when they deal a killing blow. There's a reason, is the 8th squad is by far the hardest of those 8 to play with, but of course very rewarding. Although as usual, Silica is worse than Prospero. Although I use Ghana because being stuck, getting the 1 damage back if you have 5 HP. It's not too bad. Also, yeah, acid, simple. That's why I said the grappling hook should be a science mech in the Blitzkrieg. Just a simple thing without upgrades. So +1 damage each would be ideal, but yeah, it's very risky. And remember that boost adds damage also to the self-damage, so Kai is not a good fit for any self-damaging thing. Well, the leap mech could work, but because it's 4 tiles, but yeah, it will be very dangerous. So with Kai and +1 damage each, it's 3 damage every attack. Yeah, Ghana is the best option here. Prospero close second. Of course, Ghana doesn't help after the deployment, but even if the Vec don't attack Ghana, he can still hit from behind. So, and this one will never get stuck because it's a leap mech, is a prime mech, but is an aspiring ranged mech because he can just, as the same ranged attack as the Steel Judoka, can do it wherever he wants, jump to wherever he wants. So both upgrades are good, +1 damage each. I would prioritize the leap mech, of course, if you have extra HP, but yeah, having skilled as one of the generic pilot would be a huge help. Or just +2 HP would be a huge help. If you're not for a perfect 40k run, of course, Kai and Silica would be great, just like any ranged mech. Yeah, +1 damage is very expensive. It might be worth it on the hydraulic legs, not so much on a single target, but yeah, having the passive that does more damage for every bump is great, but if you want to break the squad, you need to get lucky and find the passive that says your mechs don't take damage during your turn, then this becomes the strongest squad in the game. Also, aside from collateral damage, they are a well-rounded squad, so any good weapon will do. The nanomech is slightly more urgent, but it's still flying, it can still push, so it's not too bad. And the Viscera nanobots are better left on someone else, so you could decide between +1 damage each with +1 heal or just +1 damage, depending on the situation. Ideally you want both. And that's why the perfect 40k run becomes easier and easier when you have all that reputation. No need to spend on the grid, you can just fill in all the reactor cores, plus the free pilot or strong weapon every island, so yeah, Island 4 is very easy, Island 3 is not too bad, although I'm worried about the high threat missions, so I usually keep the Tritus as a third. The easiest hard missions, 2 stars and high threat. Instead on Archive you can find bad repairs and kill 7 enemies. I think I did find, maybe with the hazardous mechs, but they have the self-repair, so it's not as bad. Of course, when you find the 2 strongest weapons, this is the Wind Torrent, this instead adds a shield, but didn't know about that. Of course you can experiment, even though I risked a bit experimenting, but yeah, when you get the 2 strongest weapons in the game, the run is over. Still a very interesting squad that I place on S tier for now. This can stop any Vec from attacking with the smoke, this with the ice, and this is just a lot of damage, which usually wouldn't be enough on unfair, but since they can also push all 3 of them, then the only downside is collateral damage. I wish the Leap Mech would have buildings immune, of course, like the Steel Judoka one. Doesn't make them the best for a perfect 40k run, but still, the 4th difficulty wasn't there on release, and the hazardous mechs were the best squad for a regular hard run, if you know how to use them. Frozen Titans were a bit easier, and Rusty Hooks much easier to use. Also, Frozen Titans are great for many objectives, so for a perfect island, the Rusty Hooks were my first choice for a perfect 30k run. But now we have 10,000 more points, which don't mean anything, civilians saved, but unfair changes the rules. So instead of removing them from the S tier, I just made SS and SSSS. I think it's more fair that way, since it's an expansion. The Advanced Edition added stronger VEC, but it's the extra difficulty that forced me to change how I play. Though I don't like it, but it was still necessary for a perfect 30k run on hard to avoid the hardest missions and focus on the weakest mech to go through that first island. Now with one extra VEC, it's even more important. There's still a question of how balanced the new weapons versus the new VEC are on Unfair. Having the bomber mechs in SSSSS doesn't mean that every single run can be a perfect 40k run if you play perfectly. Unfortunately, luck still plays a major role to make things more interesting for people not interested in a perfect 40k run. From what I've seen, I'd say that the S tier on Unfair has a 10 to 20% chance of doing a perfect 40k run if you play perfectly. And of course, any mistake will lower that chance. Especially in the deployment phase, it's easy to miss the mistakes we are making on deployment. I learned that the hard way. As for the bomber mechs, I say they have an above 90% chance of getting a perfect 40k run. Still, there might be some tricky situation like this one. If there is a squad capable of taking care of 3 mods, it's the bomber mechs, but unfortunately they're all attacking the same way. So the key feature here, the teleporter, is not going to matter at all because they're still attacking the same way. And not only that, even if we could reach one of these to swap them, they still have the same attack here, so the map is too symmetrical, I guess. And the dam, of course, is not going to help with flying back. So this is a situation that if it's a forced mission, like it is, we cannot get out of this. Or if you have 5 VEC that are all attacking a building, you get the same result. Here I used Kai, that can destroy a VEC here, but the problem is that the bomb dispenser is not really helpful at all. Unless you have projectile that you can put them in front, but otherwise it's just 1 damage. Helpful for blocking, but yeah, it's not very powerful, so the exchange mech cannot do much. The trick here is that the exchange mech could take care of 2 VEC very easily, but in this situation, this has 1 HP too much, even without the regeneration. It wouldn't be enough. Also, 3 should be the limit for a VEC of the same species. Spider and blobbers are only 1 as a limit, but that's the reason why the moths are so overpowered. But aside from that, the squad is very good. The brute is almost fixed by going through 1, so if you attack directly and you're just pushing, and that's another use for the bomb, but that's just low level use or normal. On Unfair, we don't have time for that to place a bomb and play it like this. But you can see that Kai doesn't help much. Of course, here I have +1 damage, but with the first time pod, that's not a game changer here. And if there are 2 buildings or 2 VEC in front of the one you want to attack, so from here, then the brute is not enough anyway. But to compensate the better brute, they decided to nerf the ranged mech. So everything that I said about the old squads, of course they knew very well. They tried to buff the brutes and nerf the ranged class, but doing 1 damage to 4 VEC is nowhere near enough. So if there was projectile, if this was farther away, then of course they could take care of that. But in this situation, the bomb mech is completely useless. Could use it to block, of course, but yeah, not much it can do. And of course the working bomb will disappear if we don't use it. But the star of the show is the exchange mech, which is the strongest mech in the game, because it can just swap any 2 Vec. Of course, it works also with our own, and it has the heal ally thing, but that's not the main use. The main use is to do this. Unfortunately, there was a building in exactly the worst position, and yeah, the Pierce mech could have pushed that, but not enough since it's a moth, it's very strong, so 4 damage, it would have hit him over here against the building because of the pushing. So of course then Kai would have lost her ability, but yeah, aside from this situation, there's only one downside to this squad, and it's the time needed to think the next move because of all the possibilities. But more possibilities means more chances of the actual solution existing, because when I talk about chances, I mean that sometimes there might not be a solution, even if you play perfectly, usually turn 1. We could have avoided the previous situation with Ghana, of course, so that's his main goal, to attract Vec, but of course that's not guaranteed. But I'm pretty sure that with Ghana, the exchange mech, things would have been different. Well, the ranged mech just needs a new weapon, there's nothing, even Silica cannot save him. It's funny, but it's not the main thing, unless you have only fireflies and gastropods. That's the easiest situation, so we don't need extra help, as I said many times. So the extra help is needed. Ghana, probably on the exchange mech, but it could work on anyone. Of course, the exchange mech is not flying, so the risks getting stuck, as we saw before. But with Ghana, they are so much above the others that you probably need 5S to show the difference. But I stopped myself at 3S, and the upgrades are not as great. Extra damage for 2 cores is helpful, but not a priority. 2 bombs is definitely not a priority, but it could be very helpful again with projectiles and so on. Unfortunately, it's 3 cores, so it's too expensive to focus only on this one, for example with Mafan. While hurt enemy could be helpful mostly with 1 HP, so leapers, blobs, and spiderlings. There isn't a great upgrade to do early on, and I wonder why they didn't modify the other squads to fit in with this idea, because the other squads look like they are broken and need 1 power core to fix them. That's not the case in this situation. Also, they added 1 extra movement to the brute, and I wish they fixed the old squads the same way, at least with 1 extra movement, or as I said many times, the flying on the brute is helpful. In this situation, a bit less so, but still would be great. The second choice would be Prosper over here. Actually, my second choice would be Kazakpleth or Harold on the Bombling mech. Harold if he was flying, but it's not. And the bomb dispenser is so bad that I wouldn't mind having a second weapon, so this could help a lot at the beginning on the first island, of course not as helpful later on. It still wouldn't have been enough in the situation we saw earlier. That proves that Ghana is more helpful, but aside from when he's stuck, having the second option is great. And of course we can use, if we need something in place instead of the bombs, we can use the range mech. So more flexible use of the range mech, that is better with every squad. Now the arachnophiles don't have the same overpowered mech, just a slide affecting 4 tiles, but without flying, Organa to put him in the middle of the battle is of limited use, so I would go with Prosper Organa over here, probably equivalent. But the other two get better than the bomber mechs. The brutes become better and better. Now we can finally hit 2 targets in a more interesting way, in a way that wasn't possible. There weren't any weapons in the base game doing this. Unfortunately, the damage is pretty low, but pushing 2 Vec away is great. But of course it's compensating the fact that the science pack is nowhere near as good, and the arachnoid mech has an issue. This is a cool idea, but as you can see, it works great with the basic leapers. In this situation, we can take care of 2 Vec with 1 move. That's definitely a more interesting way, and the ranged mech becomes good again, but it's only 1 damage. So it definitely needs help, and that's why my choice here is Ghana, and it worked great on my perfect 40k run. The alternative, which is the easiest way out, though I didn't know that because I hadn't unlocked Kai Miller when I got the perfect 40k run. She does +1 damage, and with the first time pod you can get up to 3 damage, which is most Vec. But as usual, making things easier means that they're less satisfying because you don't need to use the bumps to bring someone to low HP. Of course, this is a great squad for normal, but they didn't consider unfair where there are just too many Vec. So this can work if the map is open enough, but with Vec clustered together, we definitely need to deal with 2 targets with the ranged mech, and of course multiple targets with the area shift. So if you start with skilled Ghana, then shielding self is not a priority. +1 damage is, but we cannot get that until the second island, unfortunately. Just 1 time pod in the first island and 1 in the second, then they become 2. But I cannot say that Kai is worse than Ghana, it's just less interesting to play with, and depending on the maps, one might be better than the other, of course depending on the luck. If they target Ghana, then everything will be very easy. If not, if everyone ignores Ghana, especially with mods or artillery Vec, then Kai will be the best choice. So in the situation we saw before with the bomber mechs, Kai with +1 damage could have done, after the first time pod, since I had already found it, could have taken care of the regular moth, and the arachnoid would have pushed the second moth away laterally. So I don't think that the other 2 could have taken care of the gastropod easily, because there were the Psion and the moth blocking the way. In any case, all those options means that the arachnophiles are better than the old squads, but with a very big weakness to restart a bunch more times than the bomber mechs. Well, actually many more times than the bomber mechs. Even with Kai, as the Vec get more HP, Ghana will be better and better later on. Still, I haven't named the super satisfying just for show, because even if they are double S tier, they're also doubly satisfying. Much more options means many more times that you find a great move than the Hazardous mechs, for example, that are still very good. So satisfaction and power go hand in hand. More options, cooler solutions, more satisfaction. But most squads required a lot of thinking, a lot of patience. Unlike the Mist Eaters, so if you're new to the game, I recommend the Mist Eaters first between the Advanced Edition squads. They're still harder to play than the others, but not as hard as the other new squads, and the reason is because they're based around smoke. So for a squad based around smoke, standing on smoke repairs mechs and removes smoke. Defensively, it's not very helpful, the nanofilter mending, but it means that they can attack from smoke, because the smoke will go away. Unfortunately, you don't want the smoke to go away, and this one has nothing to do with smoke at all, but is the second best mech in the game after the exchange mech, at least on lower difficulties, because when you have 5 Vec, it's not guaranteed that this will take care of 2 Vec at the same time, moving 1. You need the Vec that pushes, or leapers that deal a lot of damage. Also leapers will jump, and not only because they have high damage, but leapers can jump, so any other Vec would be stuck over here and there's nothing we could do. But in this situation, of course without upgrades, so this is definitely a priority, +1 move for the first time pod, but you can do this. The leaper can jump and get out of the way. In many situations, the Vec will be stuck and the control shot will do absolutely nothing. For example here, no valid destination. So if the Vec is stuck, the control mech cannot do anything. And it's up to the others the trend of getting better and better brutes unfortunately ends here, because this is the brute in the rusting hooks with the smoke could jump over and deal damage, and you could get to 2 tiles, which was great. Unfortunately, this is a downgrade, even though it's a flying brute. The idea was distance traveled, so now I upgraded it to show you, but it's very awkward to use. And if we do this, we'll get to the border of the board, so it's not great to be there. You cannot reach anything unless you are a ranged mech, of course. Speaking of ranged mechs, that's the main source of smoke. The brute can only do 1, which is great even if you cannot do the full damage, but the problem is that the smoldering shells only start with 2 smoke laterally. The other 2 are added at the cost of 2 cores. And that's why Mafan finally comes in handy and fixes the Mist Eaters. So without this, I would have trouble. I would definitely not put in the same tier as the Bomber Mechs. But starting with Mafan, the Bomber Mechs don't have an equivalent, don't need fixing for once, but also don't have a starting pilot that as strong changes everything dramatically. Well, I guess Ghana would work that, but yeah, ideally I would put Bomber Mechs 5S, 4S at least, but still, this is the fix that we needed. So now we can target diagonally, not just here and here. And in this situation, of course, shines, only thanks to Mafan that got the upgrade early. So this is the main priority, but it's 2 cores, more smoke. +2 damage is completely useless. Here, +1 move is great. +1 range is great too, but only if you have enough mobility to recover from this. Of course, you can also attack, since you are flying, you can attack through things. So, for example, I could take care of that, but depends on your playstyle, and in some situation +1 move will be better, in other situation +1 range will be better. Of course, the smoke ruins a bit the control shot, because you want them to attack someone else, and if you smoke them, then they are not attacking anyone. But aside from that, also this is a passive that I found the first time pod, the Void Shocker, but it's not a great weapon and is not relevant in this situation, especially with smoke. Of course, this is Island 2, but in Island 1, Mafan with the more smoke fixed the squad, unless the 1 damage ruins everything. So I understand the idea behind the fire, because you can set something on fire to deal 1 damage, even if there's a hardened carapace, but the problem is the 1 damage that ruins everything, because this is an easy solution that we cannot do it, and if we do this, it's not enough. So in this situation I started too far away, but the reason was to protect the tanks, and of course only 1 Vec attacked the tanks, the others. This is why the bad maps are those that have buildings close to the Vec. So I thought the Smog Mech would have been enough. It wasn't. Unfortunately, the control shot doesn't use the movement, even though now it doesn't work on 0 movement units. Before you could move the boulders. It's not true anymore. You can use on your friends, of course, but only for 2 tiles unless you upgrade. So this is just too far away from everything else, and yeah, this doesn't have, even if you had the movement, could not hit here. It's a bit like the Judo Mech of the Steel Judoka, so they merged the greatness of the smoke with the awkwardness of the Judo Mech, and the result is not that great, but still great enough, I guess. They are flying with 4 movement, so normally it's good enough. I just wish that this didn't have the 1 damage. Or maybe starting with 2 damage, since the more smoke is optional, and have a buildings immune down here for 2 cores instead of the +2 damage. which is not very helpful since it's just single target. So they really nerfed the ranged and made the brute better, but in this case flying is not enough. And again, Ghana could have solved the situation by dropping close to this building or in an awkward spot, so to leave the empty tile. The Vec cannot step on Ghana. Even if they don't attack him, there's still room enough to push, pull, and all of that. Still, with the Mafan fix, they are great in many missions. I wouldn't say they're on the same level on the Bomber Max, but for new players, definitely. Maybe even better. For example, the hardest mission on Archive is bad repairs. Not only you can repair directly with smoke, but you can end the brute's attack into smoke. Of course here there's a spawn, so it's not a good idea, but it doesn't matter if the brute gets destroyed when attacking if it ends on a cloud of smoke. And without pilots, Mist Eaters, Arachnophiles will be down one tier, but like this I think it's balanced for the chances you have of winning, or a perfect 40k run with these squads. So far so good, but we need to talk about the problem child of the Advanced Edition. I have no idea why they did this. It was definitely an experiment, but not a good one. Removing the ranged in this situation doomed the squad, because there's no one else as strong as the exchange mech or the control mech. I have no idea why they ignored unfair when thinking about this squad. The fire is weak enough, but for some reason they went without pushing, which could be helpful. I wonder if the original idea was to have one attack that pushes and the second that does not, but they couldn't implement it or something. That would have been very interesting, because sometimes you don't want to push, but definitely you need pushing with this squad. Priority number one, no discussion about that. So the pilot should be either Kai or Prospero, and again, in some situation one is better than the others, depends on how much they get stuck. So it's not just a matter of having weak weapons. The problem is that they cannot move, so no one is flying. They have 3, 4 and 4 movement, but it's worthless if it's stuck behind the Vec, and that's the problem on unfair, of course, but they are not ready for that. Also, this has only 2 HP for some reason. They thought it was very strong, doing 1 damage to 2 Vec. I mean, it's cool that you can choose which directions, but yeah, +1 damage is 3 power cores, so that's not happening for a while. And +1 range here could be helpful after you're taking care of the one push, but the weird thing is that hit engine standing on fire removes fire and gives the mech boost, so you can get the extra damage from the boost, and maybe Kai wouldn't be a good idea, but the truth is that they don't have enough fire. So this can set 2 tiles on fire, but you want to push the Vec, so aside from this very specific situation in the diagram, it's not very helpful. This has nothing to do with fire, and this needs 3 reactor cores to add fire, which is... I don't even have the words to say how pointless this weapon is on this squad. Fire is bad enough at dealing with high HP Vec, but it could be helpful to keep Vec away, because the Vec will not step on tiles that are on fire unless they are themselves on fire. Unfortunately, you cannot do any of that with just 2 fire tiles per turn, and one of them, of course, pushing a Vec. And the dispersal mech really needed that fire. 1 damage is nowhere near enough. The pushing is helpful only in some situations. Of course, for example, if there was a Vec here, having this ability is great and might be enough to replace a ranged mech that would attack from far away, because this definitely cannot do that without the extra range. Considering it's a science class, it should have been flying at least. this should have been flying at least, but Kai could be enough since, again, the fire from the boost is not something you can have often, so Kai might be enough to squeak by, but definitely not enough for a perfect 40k run. So this should have been +1 damage, the fire should have been by default, this would have been needed push by default because 1 damage is nowhere near enough, and of course, yeah, this passive is helpful when you have more fire, even though maybe 0 damage and fire at this point, then you can add the fire to 2 tiles and get the boost on someone else, but as things stand, Kai Miller is the obvious choice. Of course, Prospero cannot do the pushing from the start, so Henry Coan is needed to replace it, to get the push and go through the VEC, but yeah, definitely that's not a good squad for a perfect 40k run, and only because of this upgrade I won't put them with the Zenith Guard, but 1 tier above, since it can still attack to VEC, and this, if they're leapers or damaged VEC, it can still deal with multiple VEC, but in most missions it's a very weak squad, and I want to move on to the Cataclysm, which is an interesting idea, but not interesting enough. I was expecting a better version of the Hazardous mechs, the hard squad to play with, but very powerful. Instead we got a weird thing that, if you think about it, it's actually 3 previous Prime mechs upgraded. This of course is a straightforward upgrade from the Steel Judoka, though in some situation putting the VEC behind you is actually better, but at least it doesn't get stuck as much as this one. Well, this is a range that attacks in a single line, a bit like the Prime mech on the Zenith Guard. Of course, this one can push, and that makes all the difference, and of course can attack from far away. Also, it might be the only ranged attack that targets close to you, so it's a great choice for playing close or when you have spiderlings and blobs that target your ranged mech. While the Drill mech, aside from his namesake ability, provoking cataclysms by killing a VEC, is actually the same flip attack of the Aegis mech on the Frozen Titans, so that's why I said 3 Prime mechs together don't work too well. I like the last objective though, destroy 20 mountains in one game, something I like to do anyway when I have nothing else to attack, but I remember that initially people thought you could get secret pilots if you destroy enough mountains. Instead they appear pre-cracked, of course. Also, it can be a nice tile on Pinnacle. The main problem is that they're all focused in one direction, and it's more helpful to go laterally because it's harder to, well, now here there are buildings, but it's harder to do this. Would be very strong, just like the laser mech that gets the damage of the buildings at the end that ruins every attempt at a perfect 40k run. It's much harder since the VEC are close to us on unfair, and they try to get as close as possible usually, and that means that there's no room to go around to attack in this direction, I guess horizontally if you consider the names like in a chessboard, and this is horizontal and this is vertical. But in this situation we can easily take care of some of them thanks to the extra HP, but here I was just testing buildings immune. That's not very helpful because of the pushing, so not much we can do. We can block this, but again, awkward situation. This has 4 HP even without the pilot, so it's not such a big deal, but sidestep from Chanrong would have become in handy, and everyone else cannot do much 1 damage like this because we need to crack adjacent ties. So the choice is obvious. First Reactor core needs to go here, and while Prospero would be a great choice on the pitcher mech that gets often stuck behind chasm tiles, the best option is Kai boosted with +1 damage, which means the magical number 3. Just be careful what you crack, because it will destroy everything, although it's not always enough. The best move here is probably this, and then this. But you can already see in this situation how the ranged mech is very weak compared to the others, which works out because they were really overpowered. But the problem is that, just like the steel judoka, you need to find the right situation. Cracking is very convenient for the spawns like this, but of course take care of that. And now this. So in this situation it works out, but it's not always like this. It's not very often like this, unfortunately. Let's go back one step, because the main issue I had is that the only one that deals direct damage, so you want weapons that attack the same tile, because Vec are close and the other two always push, or in this situation it's fine because I'm already behind enemy lines, but usually you are over here and you want just to deal 1 damage to this tile, so micro missiles would work wonders with this squad. Instead, everyone pushes, so the push is applied before they break. Incidentally, it works on allied unit as well. Definitely not for a perfect run though. Unless it's freeze and defend both robots, you don't need to keep the freeze bot alive. Or it's a unit you have to destroy, like a building, the one controlling the bot. I think they're all Advanced Edition missions. You need to destroy a building before the end of the mission. And yes, I'm using the console to undo the turn to record all of this. As a bonus, here's the train jumping into the abyss. It just stops, but of course gets damaged. Also with stable units, so the borrowers, the pitcher mech cannot do anything, just like the judo mech. But what if, for science, I do this and break with the debug mode on? You can press Ctrl and damage any tile you want. So let's see what happens for science. Okay, it disappears. Train is no more. So where did the Cataclysm squad shine the most? So this heroic sacrifice to show you that the exploding things make void tiles immediately. So the exploding Psion could be very interesting. And once you get a void tile, which is usually impossible when there's a Vec leader with a corporal tower at the end of each island, we can one-shot any leader that's not flying, and that's the best situation for the Cataclysm squad. But normally they get stuck unless you have Prospero, so it's a good alternative to Kai, but not much possibility for the seismic capacitor. Of course, you need the upgrade as early as possible. It's not always necessary to find the right spot, while in this situation taking damage anyway, but yeah, it's not really necessary to destroy, but it's cool like this. They can let the Vec attack each other even without the bonus damage. But in most situations they are worse than the Steel Judoka, only marginally better with Kai over here, or I guess Prospero. Organa, as usual, starting behind enemy lines, fixes the mobility issue of the Prime Mech, but having 4 HP is a huge difference. This one has armor, which works the same against 3 attack Vec, and it's better later on, but as cool as the weapon is, it's not very helpful cracking the tiles. There's not enough time, so these are the cool weapons that need more time to maneuver, so normal work great. There's also the weirdest weapon that works similarly, the flood drill. If you target one water tile or lava, it will make another 4 water or lava tile around it, which is mostly useless unless you want to drown some back or eat a spawn. Unless I have more learning to do and discover a new tactic for them, I don't think they match the new VEC at all. They might be more at home in the base game, where the Hornets were the biggest threat with wings and with a bit less HP, so easier for the science mech to create those cracked tiles, but slow mechanisms are not fit for a perfect 40k run. I will do another perfect 40k run with them, because the one I recorded was ruined by, or saved I guess, by the resist chances on the volcano, and I don't like the volcano, so I didn't restart the whole thing, but we'll never know. If I could have played more carefully without the resist and avoided it, but in the end I'm going to fix that between videos, so I'm not going to record it, but perfect 40k run with the Cataclysm just to put things right, and probably I'll put them between Steel Judoka and Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg are great offensively, but are a disaster when completing objectives. Instead, this with Buildings Immune might make them better. Also more mobility. Still, they're not really an upgrade, just a side grade, and it's fine. New, more interesting squads. But the weirdest one, I haven't tested it yet, and after more than a year, I'm ready for maybe the biggest challenge of them all. Not the weakest squad, but, well, I kept this video free of spoilers for the secret squads because they're a very cool surprise when you unlock them, and I haven't tested them on Unfair yet. So next time I'll get my last perfect 40k run and finish the tier list. And then I think we can move on from the surprised Advanced Edition update when I thought I knew everything there was to know about the breach. I was very wrong. Now I'm close to 600 hours, and hopefully I'm not wrong again, because I want to focus on a much bigger game. It's between an old one and one that just came out. I think I'm going to prioritize the latest, but I've already done plenty of testing and preparation for my favorite RPG. Anyway, this is my squad tier list. I haven't played custom and random enough to do a mech tier list by themselves, but mentioned many times who are the strongest. The reason why the bomber mechs are up there, it's because of the exchange mech. Same with the Mist Eaters with the control mech. More versatile, though the power of the Hazardous Mechs Prime and Steel Judoka ranged mech, aside from the collateral damage, is great. Also the Mist Eater ranged is great, and of course the Frozen Titans ranged that just freezes one back at a time. That would be a very easy win on normal. But multi-targeting is the key for a perfect 40k run. This list would have been much different if you couldn't start with a fully trained pilot. That's how the game is built. Hard first island needs a strong pilot. As we will see next time with the Secret Squad. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.